it's three different things that have really come together, right? The first is Palestinians externalizing their struggle. Okay. Yani, for example, after the second intifada, during the second intifada, actually, there was a lot of violence that was kind of the Palestinians were subjugated to um, during that time, and that led to Palestinians in general recognizing that they just cannot win a kind of a traditional sort of war, you know. Um, and then you probably, of course, know the boycott and divestment and sanctions, the call that emerged out of Palestinian society for the rest of the world to say, more or less, it was a group of civil society organizers saying, we need help. We can't do it. Anyone with a conscience around the world, please help us and advocate for Palestine. So that's one thing. Okay. Another thing is that Palestinians have already been living around the world and have really settled in different places, including the United States. And that also has contributed to the changing narrative around people they know. And this is second, third, and potentially fourth generation of Palestinians that have lived in the United States that are able to advocate for, talk about, and present new ideas in relation to Palestine. So this is one forces, kind of Palestine related, Palestinian related forces, right? Externalizing the cause and to say, we need to talk about Palestine, please, figure something out, put pressures on Israel, right? One thing. And then two, the diaspora, Palestinian diaspora and refugees living around the world also contributed to that, right? To exerting pressure and also changing the narrative about Palestine in different places. The second has to do with global things, right? That second thing has to do with the invention of the internet, okay? And it's really quite significant because the internet provided more content, but it also provided the ability for people to find each other, okay? And the ability of people to mobilize. So ultimately in social media, of course, not only that, immediately when the internet was invented, you still found, new content, but it wasn't easily findable, if I may, right? It wasn't easily found, right? But over time, that became a lot easier, the search engines and so on. But then there's even another layer of social media that is also internet related, which is people now are able to talk to each other, create communities, and also mobilize. Okay. So that's the second factor. The third factor is really US specific, primarily, right? Which has to do with, first of all, in the late 1990s, the police brutality kind of emerged in a new way, right? Where there's a militarization of the police that emerged. Originally in Seattle, in the WTO, World Trade Organization's protests, there was a meeting in November 1999 where a lot of activists descended upon the city of Seattle, going against the kind of a meeting for World Trade Organization representatives from around the world, from different countries. That the idea was to create free trade, but they were advocating for fair trade. So a lot of activists for environment and so on, they emerged, and then what emerged out of that was kind of a public necessity, quote unquote, to advocate for militarizing the police and the level of violence during that particular event was kind of new. Like, and again, I'm not saying that in the United States the police were not violent before 1999. The civil rights movement has endless examples of that, right? And similarly, I mean, we understand that. However, it just, in a sense, there was a new level of power that emerged for the police. And in a sense, that created kind of a disconnect between the state and American society. That the state, the government, with the violence, with the police, that they can do things that they wouldn't, that they are not fully accepted by society. So that created a division. Whether you're on the right or on the left, that created a division that materialized later. Okay. So that's one of the things. The other things that have happened had to do with, we talked about the church, for example, that American form of Zionism. I mean, for example, the Christian Zionism primarily, it's very deeply connected to how Protestant Christianity has been seen and thought of in the context of the US, but mostly the evangelical stream of Christianity, Protestant Christianity in the US. And it has a particular prophecy that Israel needs to come, all Jewish people have to go to Israel, and then Israel, the kind of the return of the Messiah, effectively. And it says this, it's a prophecy, it's end of times type of a prophecy. Like John Hagee is a scholar, well, scholar theologian who wrote about this in the sense that there was going to be a big war. Now, so that was part of the reason as to why Americans have been siding with Israel, because they wanted Israel to remain and so on because of that ultimate war. But there that changed as well, and that continues to change because the church attendance had dropped over, 30, 40 years and got to the point where that narrative is not very powerful as it used to be in the past. Okay. So that created another layer. And then in addition to this, there's Black Lives Matter in particular. There's new definitions of equity. Again, the civil rights movement is important and significant and all that, but Black Lives Matter really kind of, the movement itself really highlighted the fact that this is a transnational fight, one. Two, that just because there, from the eyes of the law, there is equality between a black person, white person, Asian person, Arab person, right? Just because from the eyes of the law there is equality, it doesn't mean that the institution of the state will do the same. And hence, police brutality against Black people and so on. So ultimately, new definitions of what it means to provide equitable spaces and to be included in society started emerging in the US. And a number of other, like also similarly, like End Asian Hate is another campaign, of course. And that led ultimately, those combinations led to opening and creating more space where Americans would understand the issue of Palestine better than previously.